Defending the president. Republicans say the Department of Justice was correct to intervene in the prison sentence of one of President Donald Trump's former allies. Money matters, an inside look at the Vatican's program to develop the church's financial management. Road to the White House. As Democrats turn their attention to the Nevada caucus, Republicans are setting a record in fundraising. And a slippery slope. Pope Francis warns the faithful it does not take long to go from holiness to worldliness. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, February 13th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump defends Roger Stone, his longtime ally and confidant, as a top Democrat says the president is abusing his power. The charge from Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi comes a week after President Trump was acquitted of impeachment in the Senate, and the president is slamming his former chief of staff, who is critical of his behavior. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports now. Mark?
Tracy, the president lashed out at former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly for being disloyal after he defended a former national security aide who offered key testimony in the impeachment inquiry.
President Trump tweets, "When I terminated John Kelly, which I couldn't do fast enough, he knew full well that he was way over his head." The president is reacting to John Kelly's harsh criticism of his move to oust Colonel Alexander Vindman, one of the people who testified against the president during the House impeachment hearings. Kelly says Vindman did exactly as he was trained to do by raising concerns to his superiors after hearing the president's questionable comments. And now Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is criticizing the president on another matter, his comments about Roger Stone.
This is an abuse of power that the president is again trying to manipulate federal law enforcement to serve his political interest. But where are the Republicans to speak out on this blatant violation of the rule of law?
The president defends Stone, his longtime ally, who was convicted in November of tampering with a witness and obstructing the Russia investigation. Prosecutors recommended a 7 to 9 year prison sentence. The president earlier tweeted, "This is a horrible and very unfair situation. The real crimes were on the other side, as nothing happens to them. Cannot allow this miscarriage of justice." After that tweet, the Justice Department abruptly announced that it would reevaluate Stone's recommended sentence. Justice officials insisted the timing was coincidental, and they'd already been planning to pull the recommendation.
I thought the recommendation was ridiculous. I thought the whole prosecution was ridiculous.
And now Attorney General William Barr has taken a swipe at President Trump. He says tweets about Justice Department cases make it impossible to do the job. Tracy?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. A bipartisan measure passed in the Senate today by a vote of 55 to 45. It limits President Trump's authority to launch military operations against Iran. It now heads to the House, where it is expected to pass before landing on the president's desk. Catholic News Agency's Matt Hadra reports now from Capitol Hill.
Good evening, Tracy. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and many other Republicans oppose the resolution. They say that it sends the wrong message to U.S. allies. The resolution states that the president must win approval from Congress before engaging in further military actions against Iran.
The Senate will resume consideration of S.J. Res. 68.
Several Republican names are listed in support of the bill. Senators Lee, Paul, and Collins. Its author, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, says it calls on Congress to fulfill its responsibilities.
Some viewed this as an effort to tie President Trump's hands. It's not really about President Trump. It's really not even about the president. It's about Congress. It's about Congress fully inhabiting our Article I role to declare war and taking that deliberation seriously.
Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says it is a signal to the president.
The Senate will assert its constitutional authority and send a clear bipartisan message that the president, this president or any president, cannot sidestep Congress when it comes to matters of war and peace.
Many of his fellow Democrats say Republicans only oppose the bill because they're afraid of retribution from the White House.
They're afraid of Fox, they're afraid of talk radio, they're afraid of Twitter, they're afraid of the president coming into their state and giving them a bad nickname.
Fearful or not, Republican Lindsey Graham says the bill is a mistake.
You may think nothing really will happen if this passes, because it will never become law as we know law to be in the United States. You're right about that, but you're wrong about the signal it sends. It will send a signal that will be picked up by the most dangerous people on the planet, is that we really don't mean it when we say, when it comes to Iran getting a nuclear weapon, it will never happen.
President Trump is expected to veto the bill when it arrives on his desk, and a two-thirds majority in both the House and the Senate would be necessary to override the veto. At the Capitol, Matt Hadro, EWTN News Nightly.
Two of the biggest teachers unions in the U.S. want to put an end to active shooter drills in schools. The National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers wants the drills to be eliminated or revised because they feel it can be traumatizing to students' mental health. The unions teamed up with a group, Every Town for Gun Safety, releasing a report calling for an end to unannounced drills or drills that simulate gun violence. Instead, the groups recommend in part focusing on training teachers to respond to an active shooter. The remains of more than 2,400 babies killed in abortions were buried yesterday in Indiana. State Attorney General Curtis Hill spoke at the service. In South Bend, he says each of the babies was a life that was terminated, and each deserves to be secure in a final resting place with dignity and respect. The remains were found last year on the property of an abortion doctor who worked in Indiana. The Catholic Diocese in Hong Kong says masses will be suspended for 2 weeks amid the spread of the coronavirus. Cardinal John Han Tong wore a surgical mask as he made the announcement, but he urged members of the diocese not to panic. The former British territory has 400,000 Catholics. In China, officials are reporting a sharp rise in deaths in the outbreak. They say more than 1,300 people in the country have died. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will hold key meetings this weekend with foreign leaders. He left today for the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Pompeo and Defense Secretary Mark Esper's visit comes as the U.S. seeks a truce in Afghanistan, renewed sanctions on Iran, and peace in Israel. They're also trying to discourage U.S. allies from using 5G technology from Huawei because they fear the Chinese company will compromise security. The Justice Department just accused the company of a plot to steal trade secrets. Well, the U.S. wants colleges to be more transparent about financial gifts coming from other countries. The Education Department is investigating money given to Harvard and Yale by places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China. The department previously opened investigations at Georgetown University and Texas A&M as part of a campaign to scrutinize foreign funding. Church leaders and laity from around the world come together to participate in the Vatican's management school. The program is run by the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross to develop the church's economic, financial, and administrative capacities. It's the third year for the course, and this year, the school has a record 50 students attending. Pia De Salini, Interim Global Executive Director for the Program of Church Management, joins us now from Rome. She has also served as Chancellor of the Diocese of Orange, California, and Theological Advisor to the Bishop. Pia, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for asking me, Tracy. It's great to be back with you.
So how did this course come about?
So it was at the request of the Holy See several years ago. There was a clear need for transparency, accountability, and responsibility. So Santa Croce, the Pontifical University here, was approached, and the university went to different professors internationally and donors, and we started this program about 3 years ago with the initial phase, what we call the startup phase. We're beginning now the last cohort of students, and they go through a certificate program covering themes from ethics, finance, management, project management, so some very practical skills to help steward the treasures of the church, the material wealth of the church.
Pia, I know you're an alum of the course. Through your personal experience, have you seen a difference in the church's financial management?
I think that's something that it's a work in progress, quite honestly, and it depends region by region. There are different standards. Some of my classmates said, well, why would we be transparent about where our churches are? The last time we did that, they were burned down by the Muslims. This is going to be a very gradual process. But I think we're going to see increasing buy-in, and mostly because we're giving people the skills. And you have to remember that most people serving the church, particularly clerics and religious, even lay people like myself, my background was theology. So we need just the raw skills to be able to do the basic management.
Pia, why do you think it's important that the church have professional management?
Well, we live in the world, and we need to model to the world, in essence, best practices, and it's not only ethics, but how it is that we manage our treasure for the good of others. The treasures here of the church exist for the good of everyone in the entire world, and so we have to be very, very responsible about that, because at the end of the day, this has to do with reaching souls. And if people are scandalized by the way in which we use our resources, we're jeopardizing their relationship with Christ.
Yesterday, Pope Francis encouraged the involvement of women in his post-synodal exhortation. What can women add to the decision-making of the Catholic Church? What do you think?
You know, I'm on that question. I think we really need to be having a broader conversation. It's not just the decision-making within the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the mystical body of Christ, is not just the four walls of our parish church or of the chancery or even of the Vatican. It's the world, and it means the role that each one of us plays in the world. Pope Benedict, when he was head of CDF, Congregation for Doctrine of Faith, published a document saying that women have a role in every aspect of society. And I think the conversation really needs to shift there, because if we Catholics are living our faith as women and men in every aspect of society, the church is going to have a far greater impact, and we will be involved in more decision-making roles worldwide.
Pia De Salini, Interim Global Executive Director for the Program of Church Management. Thanks again.
Great to be with you.
Coming up, analysis of the race for the White House on the Democratic side, including a look at which candidate is winning over churchgoers. Plus, one of the candidates tests his unconventional approach. The chairman of the Iowa Democratic Party is resigning after technical glitches caused big delays in the reporting of last week's caucus results. Troy Price released a statement on Wednesday saying in part, quote, "I am deeply sorry for what happened and bear responsibility for any failures on behalf of the Iowa Democratic Party." After a breakdown in tallying the results, it took almost 3 days for the state party to issue what it said were complete results, with Pete Buttigieg as the winner. Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg launched a 2-day tour of the South today. The former New York City mayor is seeking to build relationships with African Americans in places like North Carolina. He's also seeking to move past comments he made about his controversial stop and frisk policy. In a 2015 audio recording, Bloomberg defended the plan he enacted as mayor of New York. Critics say the measure targeted minorities. President Trump and the Republican Party are building a big war chest to help them win the 2020 election. Pro-Trump groups raised more than $60 million in January and have more than $200 million on hand for this year's general election. Those figures shatter previous fundraising records. The president's campaign manager said Democrats' shameful impeachment hoax and dumpster fire primary process have contributed to the record-breaking financial support for his re-election. The next stop in the race for the White House is Nevada. The state will hold its caucus February 22nd, with South Carolina holding its primary the following week. Joining us now via Skype with his analysis of the race so far is Joel Griffith, research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, welcome back to the show. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So we just heard about the Republicans and their fundraising efforts. How significant is that financial support?
Well, these are some blockbuster numbers. It's significant both in the terms of the total, but also in the fact that President Trump has so many individual supporters at lower levels. If this pace keeps up, even if the nominee is, say it is Michael Bloomberg on the Democratic side, it appears that President Trump will be well-funded heading into the general election this November.
Jill, 2 reports this week said Senator Amy Klobuchar won the vote in New Hampshire among churchgoers. Why do you think she won that group, and do you think she'll keep it going?
I think a lot of this comes down to her tone. If you watch her throughout the debate, she has a very measured tone about her, and it really disguises a lot of her very progressive viewpoints. She wants there to be severe restrictions on gun ownership, even though she's made overtures to pro-life Democrats. She's on the record supporting renewed federal funding of international agencies that actually provide abortion services. And she's on the record opposing leasing for natural gas and oil on federal lands. A lot of folks across the Midwest especially they're on opposite sides of her on those issues. So I think that she's winning, though, that vote, at least in New Hampshire, because her tone masks a lot of her more progressive policy stances.
You know, we also heard earlier about Michael Bloomberg and his unconventional approach to trying to win the Democratic nomination. What exactly is he doing, and do you think it will work?
Well, he is spending inordinate sums of money on both his staff, he's very well-paid staff, along with advertising. If you saw some of the memes that came out today, there's a big generation of memes as well for Mayor Bloomberg. But the approach does seem to be working in some respects, because he is moving up in the polls for the Democratic nomination. It'll be very interesting to see what happens if former Vice President Biden's support continues to languish. It could be that Mayor Bloomberg gets a lot of the support that once was in Vice President Biden's camp.
What do you think about those dredged up comments about the stop and frisk policy? Do you think it hurt him in any way?
I think it might hurt him, but I think a lot of that criticism is unfair. If you look at his record as mayor, sure, there's some things to be troubled by, but the fact is, when it comes to really restoring law and order, he was hoping to do that. And a lot of those communities that were most severely impacted, those are minority communities that were suffering. And he was trying to actually get some of that crime under control. So I don't think it's fair to be going after him on those that are suggesting he was a racist. Criticize the policy if you want, but that is a very, very severe allegation to make, and I don't think the evidence warrants that.
And Joel, finally, where do you think we go from here in the race?
Well, it's going to be a very interesting stretch now with South Carolina coming up, and then Nevada and South Carolina. This has been looked at to be Vice President Biden's firewall, but the polls show even South Carolina tightening. And if you go over to Nevada, the latest polls I've seen actually shows Senator Sanders now in the lead in Nevada. So that's going to be another rough and tumble state. Is another caucus similar to Iowa, so it could be a long night. Hopefully not. But this is turning out to be something that not many prognosticators are actually predicting.
All right, Joel, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate you coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Joel Griffith, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you again. Up next, Pope Francis tells the faithful how best to deal with temptation. At Virginia holds a rally for the unborn.
Lasciarsi scivolare lentamente.
Pope Francis says it does not take long to slowly slide from holiness to worldliness. At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says good intentions are not enough to avoid falling into sin. And when we are tempted by vanity and money or don't give thanks, we lose everything. Pope Francis says instead, we should keep our eyes on the Lord. The state of Virginia holds its second annual March for Life. Thousands of pro-lifers rallied in Richmond. The day began with mass. Supporters also met with lawmakers before the rally started in the afternoon. Despite a little rain, officials say there was another strong turnout this year. And tonight on EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly, Senator Mike Lee explains why he wants the Senate to pass a proposal to protect babies who survive an abortion.
Children are born in a failed abortion attempt. And after the doctor has failed to terminate the baby's life, we need protections in place to make sure that that person is treated as a person.
The Republican from Utah also calls on his colleagues to show more concern for abortion survivors. You can see the entire interview tonight at 10 Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for other airing times. And finally tonight, analysis and reaction continues to pour in from the Holy Father's exhortation on the Querida Amazonia, or beloved Amazon. Pope Francis did not endorse the possibility of ordaining seasoned married men in the area. Instead, he asked bishops to pray for more vocations. Some faithful in the remote region can go months or even years without Mass. Here to help us take a look at this issue is Father Thomas Petrie, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C. He is also co-host of the Church Alive Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio. Father, welcome back. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
So what did you make of this document?
I was very happy with it. It's a very beautiful document that our Holy Father has written, a lot to take in, a lot of wonderful spiritual nuggets about women and priests and the nature of evangelization and our need to care for the the environment because the environment is where people live. We need to care for the environment and those of the indigenous people because there are people there who need to survive in the environment.
Yeah, and the big talker too, of course, was the issue of seasoned married men being ordained. What are your thoughts?
I'm not surprised at all that the Holy Father didn't move on that. He's been saying his entire pontificate that he thinks celibacy is a grace. He just said last month in a recently published interview in an Italian book that he says grace is a decisive, or that celibacy is a decisive grace for the Roman Catholic Church. People want him to teach things he's not going to teach, say things he's not going to say. He made that very clear in the exhortation.
You know, there has been some confusion, though, if this is the final word on that.
Well, this is only because there are adjutants in the church who want to push the Holy Father to try to change church discipline. Look, there are already married priests in the Catholic Church, in the Anglican Ordinariate, in the Eastern Catholic Church, so it is a discipline, but the norm is and it seems will continue to be celibacy for priests.
Yeah, and the Pope also focused on respecting indigenous cultures and enculturalization. What's the Church's authentic approach to evangelizing?
Well, enculturation and evangelizing culture means accepting what is good in the culture and using that and baptizing it, so to speak, to turn it to Jesus Christ, but also purifying culture. And so when we ask questions like the Amazonian cultures and whether certain elements of the culture can be used at Mass, that's something that the Holy See and the Church will have to look at, but it's always about bringing everything to Jesus Christ.
Is there anything else in the document that we should pay attention to?
Well, one of the things I think is really wonderful, not apart from the ecological aspect, is the Holy Father's focus that the gospel needs to be proclaimed not simply by priests. There's this focus on priests because you need priests for the Eucharist, but there's more to the Church than just the Eucharist. The Eucharist is the center, it's the summit, but there are other vocations. There's priests, religious, and the lay faithful. And so the Holy Father focused that the religious and the lay faithful and priests need to work together to proclaim the gospel in their own vocations.
Yeah, and some people may say, well, what does this mean for me?
Well, I think what the Holy Father is challenging all of us to do is to be mindful of our neighbor, not just simply the neighbor down the street or in our own country, but to remind that we are all kind of responsible for the world. And the things that we might do, say here in the United States, products we may make, products we may purchase, actually can affect other cultures and their ability to live well and their ability to survive in their own environments.
And quickly, what's next?
Well, obviously the Church, as with all of these synods, the Holy Father has issued an exhortation, so part of it is simply reading it, trying to assimilate it, trying to understand what we can do in our own small ways to proclaim the gospel and to help those who need help.
Great. Well, Father, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Father Thomas Petrie, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and of course, co-host of EWTN Radio's The Church Alive. Thank you. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We are back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.